He stood frozen in the doorway, not daring to believe what he was seeing. His daughter, the little girl who hadn't eaten for 2 weeks, was chewing. Tristan Blackwell lifted a hand to cover his mouth. Tears spilled down the face of the man the entire Chicago underworld feared. And inside his mind there was only one question, beating like a pulse. How? Tristan lost his wife 6 months ago. Caroline didn't die of illness or an accident. She died from a bullet meant for him. Tristan's enemy fired and hit the wrong person, right in front of the preschool gate, right before the eyes of their daughter. Penny, 5 years old, watched her mother fall. Blood, screams, then silence. From that day on, something inside the little girl shattered. She stopped speaking, stopped playing, stopped smiling, and 2 weeks ago she stopped eating. Tristan hired the best doctors in America, the leading child psychologists, renowned nutrition specialists, people who had spent their entire lives saving children like Penny. No one could reach her. Penny only sat there, growing thinner by the day, her shoulder bones pressing sharply beneath a thin shirt, her eyes fixed on her mother's photograph on the wall as if she were waiting for something. Tristan sat beside his child for hours, begging, promising her everything in the world. But Penny didn't even look at him. Tristan Blackwell was the most notorious mafia boss in Chicago. He could order anyone killed. He could buy this whole city if he wanted, but he couldn't save his own daughter. Then, one winter morning, a new housemaid stepped into the mansion. Her name was Elise Monroe, 27 years old. Thin, with deep shadows beneath her eyes, from the poor South Side. She had once been a pediatric nurse, had cared for hundreds of children, but she had left the profession for a reason she never told anyone. When she heard about Penny, Elise didn't look shocked. She didn't promise she could perform a miracle. She only nodded, her gaze strangely understanding. Because when Elise was 10, her mother also died, and 18 months ago, she lost her son before he ever had the chance to be born. Elise knew what that darkness looked like. She knew the feeling of wanting to disappear from this world. She had once stood at that edge, and she had stepped back on her own. Maybe that was why she understood Penny. Maybe that was why she was the only person who could save the little girl. If you've ever felt powerless while watching someone you love slowly wither away, keep watching what happens next. Don't forget to like, share this video with those who need to hear this story, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next heart-stirring story. At 5 o'clock in the morning, while the entire city of Chicago was still submerged in darkness, Elise Monroe was already seated on the first train leaving the South Side. She sat close to the window, watching the streetlights slide past like faint, hazy streaks of light. Her face was reflected in the cold glass, thin, cheekbones sharply defined, deep shadows beneath her eyes, as if she hadn't slept well for months. But her hands were different, warm, steady. They were the hands that had cared for hundreds of sick children over 4 years as a pediatric nurse. The hands that had once held tiny, trembling fingers and whispered that everything would be all right. In the pocket of her old coat, she carried something she always kept close, a pair of yellow baby socks, so small, so soft, never once used. She didn't know why she still kept them. Maybe because they were the only thing left of the son she never got to meet. The train stopped at the final station. Elise stepped down and drew a long breath. The winter air cut into her lungs like a knife. She walked another 20 minutes before she reached the Blackwell mansion. And when she stood before the gate, she understood why all of Chicago knew this place. An iron gate, more than 3 meters tall, glossy black, cold as a warning. Security cameras mounted everywhere, electronic eyes tracking every movement. Bodyguards in black suits on both sides, faces as hard as stone. Elise wasn't afraid. She'd survived far worse. She'd survived her mother's death when she was 10, survived the lonely years in an orphanage, survived 18 months ago, when a doctor told her her son's heart was no longer beating. What was an iron gate and a few bodyguards compared to that? She walked up and handed her documents to the guard at the gate. They checked them, made a call to confirm, then opened the gate and let her in. But she hadn't even taken many steps before a man stopped in front of her. Tall, broad-shouldered, eyes sharp as a razor. She knew him. Finn, the most trusted guard at Tristan Blackwell's side. He looked her up and down, not bothering to hide his suspicion. "You know who my boss is, don't you?" His voice was ice cold. Elise nodded. "I know he has a daughter who needs help." Finn gave a small laugh, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. People who come here for money don't last long, and the ones who come for some other reason? He tilted his head, staring at her without blinking. They're worse. Elise didn't flinch. She met his gaze and spoke evenly. I'm here because I need to do something that means something. Finn was silent for a long time. Then he stepped aside and let her pass. Mrs. Ruth met her at the back door. She was the mansion's housekeeper, a 60-year-old woman with silver hair neatly pinned up and eyes red and swollen as if she'd been crying. She led Elise into the kitchen. The kitchen was larger than the apartment Elise had once rented on the south side. A black granite countertop polished to a shine. A 2-door refrigerator so tall it nearly touched the ceiling. A kitchen island big enough for 10 people to sit. But everything felt cold, silent, like a house with no one living in it. No, like a house in mourning. Mrs. Ruth handed her an apron and began explaining the work, but her voice grew softer, softer, until it was almost nothing but a whisper. Don't ask about the lady of the house. Don't look at the master for too long. And don't. She stopped, swallowing hard. Don't expect anything from the child. Elise was about to ask more when she heard a sound. A television, echoing down from upstairs. Bright cartoon music, characters laughing, familiar children's songs. But there was no child's laughter, no voice. Only the television running by itself in the silence. Elise felt a chill crawl up her spine. She turns on the cartoon channel her mother used to play. Mrs. Ruth said, her voice trembling. All day, from morning to night, like she's waiting for her mother to come home. She turned her face away and wiped at tears in a hurried motion. I cared for Caroline from the time she was 8. I watched her grow up. I watched her fall in love. I watched her become a mother. Her voice caught in her throat. Now I have to watch her little girl die a little more every day, and I can't do a single thing. Elise placed a hand on her shoulder. She didn't say anything. She just stood there, present. Then she moved toward the staircase. With every step, the cartoon television grew louder. Those cheerful tunes rang through the deathly house like a cruel, bitter mockery. And the silence around them was even more frightening. Elise knew she was about to meet the most notorious Mafia boss in Chicago, the man the entire underworld feared. But what made her tremble wasn't him. It was the 5-year-old child behind that door, quietly killing herself. Elise hadn't even made it up the stairs when she heard footsteps behind her. Heavy, slow, as though each step carried a ton of invisible stone. She turned, and for the first time, she saw Tristan Blackwell in the flesh. He was taller than she'd imagined, close to 1.9 meters, broad-shouldered, the build of a man used to giving orders and being obeyed. But the black suit he wore was rumpled, as if he'd been wearing it for days without changing. Stubble covered his jaw. His eyes were sunken, the dark circles beneath them almost black, as if he hadn't slept in a very long time. He didn't look at her. He didn't look at Mrs. Ruth. He didn't look at anyone at all. He walked straight to the coffee machine, poured himself a cup, then stood by the window and stared out toward Lake Michigan. The water was a dull gray under the winter sky, cold, empty, like the eyes of the man standing there. You're the new one. His voice carried without him turning around. Cold, rough, like stones grinding together. Elise drew in a breath. Yes, sir. Elise Monroe. Silence. He still didn't turn. What's your background? I was a pediatric nurse for 4 years. This time, Tristan turned his head. For the first time, he really looked at her. His eyes swept over her face, her hands, the way she stood, as if measuring, as if searching for something. Why'd you quit? A simple question, but it drove straight into Elise's chest like a knife. She swallowed hard. The image of the ultrasound room 18 months ago rose in her mind. The doctor's pale face, the black and white screen with no heartbeat flickering anymore. Because there are things I couldn't save. Her voice came out like a breath. Tristan watched her for a few more seconds. Then he turned back to the window. He didn't ask anything else. He didn't need to. Maybe he understood. People who carry pain tend to recognize each other. Do you know how many have tried? He asked, his voice without emotion. 20. Doctors, psychologists, people who've written books about children, people with doctorates, with private practices, with patients lined up for months. He took a sip of coffee. No one lasts more than 3 days. Elise stayed silent. You think you're more special than them? The question landed like a challenge. Elise knew what she was supposed to say. She was supposed to be humble, to lower her head, to be a well-behaved housemaid, but she didn't. No, she said evenly. I don't think I'm more special than them. I just think I understand her better than they do. Tristan snapped around. For the first time, there was something in his eyes besides emptiness, surprise, or maybe curiosity. You understand my daughter, his voice sharpened. A stranger from the South Side, who's never even met her, and you dare to say you understand her. Elise didn't step back. I know what it feels like to lose your mother, she said. And I know what it feels like to not want to eat, not want to talk, not want to exist anymore. Doctors and specialists have their degrees, but they don't have that. Just then, Mrs. Ruth came into the kitchen. She was carrying a tray, fried eggs, toast cut into triangles, a glass of orange juice, all untouched. Elise looked at the tray, then at Mrs. Ruth. Mrs. Ruth didn't say a word. She walked straight to the trash can and dumped everything in. The sound of the plate hitting the bottom echoed in the stillness. Every day like this, Mrs. Ruth said, her voice thick and hoarse. 14 days of refusing a single solid bite, surviving only on the cold, sterile drip of IV fluids. Elise felt a sharp ache in her chest. 14 days. A 5-year-old child eating nothing for 14 days. She looked down into the trash. The golden pieces of egg lay mixed with banana peels and coffee grounds. A perfect breakfast. No one ate it. May I take the next meal up? Elise asked. Her voice sounded in the silent kitchen. Mrs. Ruth stared at her, startled. Tristan still stood at the window, not turning. But from the kitchen doorway, a cold voice spoke. 20 people have tried. Finn stood there, arms folded across his chest, his gaze still full of doubt. Every one of them was as confident as you. Every one of them failed. Elise turned to look at him. Then she said, her voice steady, without trembling, without hesitation, then I'll be the 21st. The kitchen fell into silence. Mrs. Ruth lifted a hand to her chest. Finn raised an eyebrow. And Tristan, for the first time, turned fully around. He looked at Elise, long, carefully, as if trying to figure out who she was, what she wanted, whether she truly believed what she was saying, or was only saying it because she had to. Elise stood there without lowering her head, without avoiding his eyes. She didn't have the credentials the other 20 had. No experience treating traumatized children, no clinic, no reputation. She had only one thing they didn't. She knew what wanting to die looked like. She had stood at that edge herself. 18 months ago, after she lost her baby, there were nights she lay in bed and wondered whether she needed to wake up the next morning. There were days she didn't eat, didn't drink, didn't leave her room. She understood Penny not through theory, but through her own bones and blood. Tristan didn't say anything. He only set his coffee cup down on the counter and walked out of the kitchen. He didn't agree, but he didn't forbid it either. Elise understood. In the world of powerful men like him, silence could be permission. She watched his back disappear through the doorway. Then she turned to Mrs. Ruth. What time is lunch? Mrs. Ruth looked at her, eyes still red, shimmering with something like hope. 12 o'clock. Elise nodded. 20 people had failed. A long line of high-priced consultants and child prodigy doctors had already tried and gone. But Elise wasn't an expert. She was only a woman who had once wanted to die, and who had pulled herself back out of the darkness. Maybe that was why she wouldn't give up. At 12 in the afternoon, Elise carried the tray of food Mrs. Ruth had just prepared and started up the staircase. Oatmeal porridge, a few small slices of apple, a glass of warm milk, a simple meal, gentle on the stomach for a child who hadn't eaten anything for 2 weeks. With every step on the stairs, the cartoon television grew louder. Cheerful melodies, characters laughing and playing, a children's song repeating again and again, but there was no child's laughter answering back. Only that bright, happy sound spilling into a deathly space. The contrast made Elise's skin prickle with cold. The second-floor hallway was long and wide, filled with light from tall glass windows looking out over Lake Michigan. But what made Elise stop wasn't the view outside. It was the photographs, hanging everywhere along the walls. Caroline on her wedding day, in a pure white dress, smiling brilliantly beside Tristan. Caroline holding newborn Penny in the hospital, eyes red from crying, yet her mouth curved with happiness. Caroline and Penny in the kitchen, both of them dusted in flour, grinning at the camera. Elise paused before each picture. She saw a family that had once been whole, a mother who loved her child with everything in her, a father who looked at his wife as if she were the entire universe, a child growing up surrounded by love. This was what Elise had once dreamed of. A family, a child, an ordinary life she had never been allowed to have. 18 months ago, she had almost touched that dream, and then it slipped from her hands. Forever. She kept walking. Penny's room was at the end of the hallway. The door was slightly open. The television sound poured out more clearly than ever. Elise drew a long breath, then pushed the door and stepped inside. The room was spacious, painted a soft pink, filled with toys and stuffed animals, but everything was covered in a thin layer of dust. No one had touched any of it. A large dollhouse sat in the corner with its doors closed tight. A bookshelf held neatly lined comic books and coloring books. A small desk with an untouched box of colored pencils. Everything was perfect. Everything was dead. A television mounted on the wall played a cartoon about little puppies. Bright colors, lively sounds, but no one was watching. And in the corner of the room, her back against the bed frame, a little girl sat motionless. Penny. Elise felt her heart draw tight. The child was thinner than she had imagined, so thin that her shoulder bones pressed sharply beneath her light pajamas, so thin that her wrists looked like twigs. Her brown hair, dull and tangled, fell forward to hide her face. But the most frightening thing wasn't that fragile body. It was her eyes. Penny was staring at a photograph of her mother hanging on the opposite wall, but her eyes were empty, as if no one was home, as if her soul had left her body a long time ago, leaving only a shell behind, waiting for something. She didn't turn when Elise entered. She didn't look. She didn't react. As if Elise didn't exist. Elise didn't speak. She set the tray down on the small table near the door, far from Penny. She didn't push it toward the child. She didn't force anything. Then she pulled a small chair over, placed it about 5 steps away from Penny, and sat down. She just sat there, quiet, no talking, no requests, no pleading, no promises. She only stayed present. 10 minutes passed, 20, 30. The afternoon sunlight moved slowly across the floor. The television kept playing. Penny kept staring at her mother's photograph. Elise kept sitting there. No one said a word. In that silence, Elise remembered herself. When she was 10, after her mother died of cancer, she had sat like this too, in the corner of an orphanage room, staring at a white wall, not eating, not speaking, not crying. She remembered that feeling. The feeling that the whole world had collapsed and there was no reason left to keep existing. She remembered adults coming to her and saying everything would be all right, telling her she had to be strong, saying her mother was in heaven watching over her. Meaningless words, empty promises. No one truly understood. No one truly stayed, until her grandmother came. Her grandmother didn't speak. She only sat beside her, every day, for hours at a time, until Elise was ready to open her heart. 40 minutes, 50, 1 hour. The sunlight faded. The room sank into darkness. Elise still sat there, and then it happened, only for an instant, so brief she almost missed it. Penny glanced at her, just 1 second. Those empty eyes moved away from her mother's photograph and looked toward Elise. Then they turned back, as if it had never happened, but Elise saw it. For the first time in 2 weeks, someone had come to Penny without forcing her to eat, without forcing her to speak, without forcing her to do anything at all. Just sitting there, staying present. And Penny had noticed. It was fully dark. Elise stood up, gentle and careful not to make a sound. She didn't say goodbye. She didn't promise she would return tomorrow. She simply slipped out of the room in silence. The tray of food remained untouched on the table. But that didn't matter. The 20 people before Elise had failed. All those world-class experts had failed to reach Penny, but they hadn't seen what Elise had just seen. Penny had looked at her. Only for a second. But it was a second of hope. On the second day, Elise returned to Penny's room at exactly 12 in the afternoon, with the same tray of food Mrs. Ruth had prepared, with the same small chair placed 5 steps from the bed, with the same safe distance that didn't invade. She set the tray down on the table by the door, pulled the chair into place, sat, and waited. Penny was still in the corner of the room, just like yesterday, still staring at the photograph of her mother on the wall, still motionless, like a statue. The television still played the familiar cartoon. Everything looked exactly the same as the day before, but today, Elise decided to do one small thing differently. After 10 minutes of silence, she spoke, softly, as if she were afraid of shattering something fragile. "Penny, you don't have to eat if you don't want to. I'm just going to sit here." No response. Penny kept staring at her mother's picture. Elise continued, her voice low and warm. "My grandmother used to say that when your heart hurts too much, food loses all its taste. Like everything in your mouth feels wrong. Like none of it belongs there." Silence. The television kept chirping brightly, but Elise saw something. The smallest movement. Penny turned her head. Just a little. Not enough to call it looking, but enough for Elise to know the child was listening. Elise drew a deep breath. She knew what she had to do. She had to open her heart first. "I lost my mother too, Penny." Her voice trembled slightly as old memories rushed back. "I was 10. My mother was sick, very sick, and one day, she didn't wake up." Penny didn't turn fully, but she stopped looking at the photograph. Her eyes dropped to the floor, as if she were thinking about something. "After my mother died, I didn't want to eat either," Elise went on. "I thought, why eat when my mother is gone? Why live when the person I loved most has left?" Her voice caught. "I know that feeling, Penny. I know how much it hurts. Like someone is crushing your heart. Like you can't breathe. Like the whole world doesn't mean anything anymore." And then, something miraculous happened. Penny turned her head. All the way. For the first time in 2 weeks, the little girl looked straight at another person. Her large brown eyes, empty for 14 days, now shimmered with something. Not hope. Not yet. But curiosity. Recognition. The quiet empathy of a child who has found someone who understands. "Your mom," Penny's voice came out, rough, weak, as if her throat had forgotten how to make sound after 2 weeks of not using it. "Your mom died too." Tears rose in Elise's eyes. She couldn't stop them. She didn't want to. She nodded, her voice shaking. "Yes, sweetheart. My mom died too." Penny watched her for a few seconds. Then she whispered, her voice as small as breath. "Mine too." 4 words. Only 4. But they were the first words Penny had spoken in 2 weeks. 4 words that the nation's most elite clinical minds, all armed with their prestigious diplomas, couldn't make her say. Elise felt a sharp ache in her chest, not from sorrow, but from relief, from hope. Penny kept looking at her, truly looking, as if searching Elise's eyes for something. Truth, sincerity, understanding. "Does it hurt a lot?" the little girl asked, her voice still hoarse but a little clearer. Elise didn't lie. "Every day, sweetheart. Every day I miss my mother." "Does it still hurt now?" "Sometimes. But it's different now. It doesn't cut as deep as it used to. I learned how to live with it." Penny fell silent. Her lips trembled, and Elise realized it was the first emotion that had appeared on the child's face in 2 weeks. Not a smile, not tears, just the trembling of a little girl trying not to break apart. "Can you stay?" Penny asked, so softly Elise almost didn't hear it. Elise's heart tightened. She wanted to rush over and hold her. She wanted to say everything would be all right, but she knew that wasn't what Penny needed. The child only needed an answer, a promise. "As long as you need me, I'm here," Elise said, her voice thick. "I promise." Outside the bedroom door, Mrs. Ruth stood with her back against the wall, both hands clamped over her mouth. She had been standing there since Elise began to speak. She heard everything. Penny's raw little voice, the trembling questions. Tears streamed down the wrinkled cheeks of the older woman. The child had spoken. For the first time in 2 weeks. For the first time since the day her mother died. Mrs. Ruth turned and ran down the stairs as fast as she could. "Mr. Tristan! Mr. Tristan!" Her voice rang through the mansion. At the end of the hallway, Finn stood still. He had heard everything too. The conversation inside the room. Penny's voice. Elise's promise. The suspicion he had held toward the woman from the south side was gone. In its place was something else. Almost respect. Almost admiration. She had done what the 20 before her couldn't do. In only 2 days. Inside the room, Elise remained seated on the chair. Penny remained in the corner by the bed, the distance of 5 steps still between them. The tray of food was still untouched. But something had changed. An invisible thread had been tied. Penny had spoken. Yet Elise knew it was only the first step. To truly save the child, she would need more than words. She would need to find something. Something that could connect Penny back to life. Something that could make her want to stay in this world. And that night, in the small room set aside for the help, when Elise lay in bed and stared up at the ceiling, she would remember what it was. At 3 o'clock in the morning, Elise was still lying on the narrow bed in the small room set aside for the help. Her eyes were wide open, fixed on the ceiling. Darkness pressed in around her, but inside her mind it was the opposite, crowded with images. Penny, the child's empty eyes, shoulder bones rising beneath thin pajamas, the rasp of a voice unused for 2 weeks. Mine too. Those 4 words kept echoing through Elise's thoughts like a sorrowful tune that wouldn't end. She turned onto her side and tried to close her eyes, but sleep wouldn't come. Instead, old memories began to surface. Elise sat up and switched on the bedside lamp. A pale yellow light filled the little room. She opened the top drawer of the nightstand and took out the thing she always kept close. The yellow baby socks. Tiny. Soft. The tags still attached because they had never been used. Elise held them in her hands, her fingers trembling as she traced each seam. She remembered the day she bought them, 18 months ago, when her belly was round and full in her 7th month, when she still believed life could be good, when she still had hope. The memories rushed back like floodwater. 18 months ago, Elise was pregnant with her first child, a baby boy. She had named him Noah. She had already bought a crib, a stroller, clothes, and these yellow socks. She had imagined her son entering the world, crying his first cry, wrapping his tiny hand around her finger. She had dreamed of sleepless nights feeding him, mornings pushing him through the park, birthdays with cake and candles. But then one day, the baby stopped moving. Elise lay in bed all night, waiting for the familiar kick. Nothing came. The next morning, she went to the hospital. The doctor performed an ultrasound, and his face went pale. "We're so sorry, Elise. The baby's heart has stopped." She remembered screaming, crying, begging, as if her voice could wake her son back up, but it couldn't. Noah was gone, and she still had to give birth, still had to endure hours of labor to deliver a baby who would never breathe. They placed Noah in her arms. 10 minutes. They gave her 10 minutes with her son. So small. Lips turned bluish, eyes closed tight. Beautiful in a way that broke her. Elise held him and cried until there were no tears left. Then they took him away, and she never saw him again. These yellow socks were the only thing she kept, the only thing that proved Noah had ever existed. After she lost her baby, Elise collapsed. She couldn't return to work at the hospital. She couldn't look at other children without thinking of Noah. She couldn't hear a child cry without wanting to scream. She quit her job, left her apartment, left her friends, left everything. She moved to the South Side, rented a cheap room, and disappeared from the world. There were nights she lay in bed and wondered whether she needed to wake up the next morning. There were days she didn't eat, didn't drink, didn't leave her room. She wanted to vanish, to end it all, to follow Noah somewhere there was no pain anymore. Just like Penny now. Elise pressed the socks to her chest, tears sliding down her cheeks. She understood Penny, more than anyone, because she had stood where the child was standing. She had wanted to let go of everything, but she didn't, because there had been someone who wouldn't allow it. Her grandmother, Helen. After Elise's mother died of cancer when Elise was 10, her grandmother was the one who took her out of the orphanage, the one who raised her, the one who pulled her out of the dark. She didn't force Elise to eat. She didn't scold her. She didn't beg. She didn't say empty things like everything will be all right or you have to be strong. She did only one thing. Every day, she made grilled cheese and sat down to eat with her. Grilled cheese. Simple. Ordinary. Nothing special. But she sat there, eating beside her, saying nothing, only staying present. And little by little, Elise began to eat again, began to speak again, began to live again. Her grandmother's grilled cheese had saved her life. Then Elise suddenly remembered what Mrs. Ruth had said yesterday. Caroline used to make grilled cheese for Penny every Sunday after church. It was a tradition between mother and daughter. It was memory. It was love. It was the thread tying Penny to life. Elise shot up from the bed. Her heart pounded fast. Now she knew what she had to do. Not doctors with lab tests. Not specialists with complicated psychological theories. Just bread, butter, and cheese. So simple that the 20 people before her had all overlooked it. But sometimes the simplest thing holds the greatest power. Elise sank to her knees beside the bed and folded her hands. She wasn't someone who often prayed, but tonight she needed faith. God, I don't know if I can do this. I'm only a housemaid. I don't have degrees. I don't have experience. I only have my own pain. But if you brought me here, please don't let me fail. Please give me the strength to save that child, the way my grandmother once saved me. She opened her eyes and looked toward the window. The night sky was still pitch black, but inside her, something was beginning to blaze. Hope. Elise knew what she would do, and she wouldn't fail. At 5 o'clock in the morning, while the sky outside the window was still pitch black, Elise was already in the kitchen. She opened the refrigerator, and the cold light inside washed over her face. Inside was an entire world of expensive food. Organic vegetables shipped in from California, Gruyere cheese from Switzerland, Wagyu beef from Japan, free-range eggs that cost $10 a carton, the very things the nutrition specialist had written into Penny's meal plan, the very things the little girl hadn't so much as touched for 14 days. Elise ignored them all. She reached instead for the simplest things: white bread, butter, American cheese, each slice sealed in plastic. The cheapest items in this massive refrigerator. "What are you doing?" Mrs. Ruth's voice came from behind her. Elise turned. The housekeeper stood in the kitchen doorway, eyes still heavy with sleep, silver hair slightly mussed. She must have heard the noise and come down to check. "I'm making breakfast for Penny," Elise answered, setting the ingredients on the counter. "Mrs." Ruth stared at what she'd taken out, surprised. "White bread, American cheese. You know what the nutrition specialist says about these things, don't you?" "I do," Elise said, turning on the stove and setting a pan in place. "But I want to ask you something. What did Caroline usually make for Penny?" Mrs. Ruth went still. Her eyes blinked, as if Elise had asked something that hurt to answer. "Grilled cheese," she whispered after a long moment. Every Sunday after they came home from church, she made grilled cheese for Penny. The child stood on a little stool and helped her mother spread the butter. They laughed the whole time. Her voice caught. It was their tradition. Elise nodded. "That's what we need." She began spreading butter on the bread, her movements practiced, as if she'd done it 1,000 times. Mrs. Ruth stepped closer and stood beside her, silent for a moment, and then she began to speak, her voice low and heavy with sadness. "I cared for Caroline from the time she was 8. Her mother died early, in a car accident. Her father traveled for work, came home only a few times a year." Elise flipped the bread in the pan, listening. She grew up in a huge house that was empty, like Penny now, lonely inside 4 walls. No one to talk to, no one to hold her when she was afraid. Mrs. Ruth drew a slow breath. "Then she met Mr. Tristan. I knew he was dangerous. The whole world knows who he is and what he does. I tried to stop her, but Caroline only smiled and said, 'Ruth, he looks at me like I'm the whole universe. No one has ever looked at me that way.'" Tears began to slide down Mrs. Ruth's cheeks. The day she died, a part of him died with her. He isn't the man he used to be. Elise set the toasted bread on a plate. The cheese melted into a golden sheen. "There's still a part of him," she said gently. "Penny." Mrs. Ruth wiped her tears with the corner of her apron. "But he doesn't know how to reach her. He's afraid. Afraid that if he gets too close, he'll lose the last child he has left. So he avoids her, works, hires people to care for her, thinking money and specialists can replace a father's love." Elise didn't speak. She understood. The fear of loss can make people do the strangest things, pushing away the ones they love most because they're terrified of living through that pain again. "What's that?" A cold voice sounded from the kitchen doorway. Elise and Mrs. Ruth turned at the same time. Tristan stood there, still in the same rumpled black suit, eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep. He looked at the plate of grilled cheese in Elise's hands, his expression hard to read. "Breakfast for Penny," Elise answered calmly. "That's not on the meal plan." Tristan's voice sharpened. "The nutrition specialist said she needs protein, vitamins, minerals, not white bread and fat-loaded cheese." "I know what the specialist said." Elise set the plate down on the counter and looked straight into the Mafia boss's eyes. No lowering her gaze, no trembling, They said she needs nutrition, but she isn't eating what they prescribed. 14 days. So what do we lose by trying something else? Tristan didn't answer. His jaw clenched. Mrs. Ruth spoke up beside Elise, her voice unsteady. It's what Caroline used to make for Penny. Every Sunday. His wife's name hit the kitchen like a fist to the chest. Tristan went still. His body tightened. Those sleepless, hollow eyes flashed with something. Pain, longing, and maybe even fear. The tense silence stretched. If it doesn't work, he started, his voice rough. If it doesn't work, I'll leave, Elise cut in. But if it does, you owe your daughter a sundae with this sandwich. You owe her what you haven't given her for the past 6 months. Tristan stared at her, long and searching. Elise couldn't tell what he was thinking. Maybe anger that a housemaid dared to speak to him like that. Maybe surprise. Or maybe, just maybe, a thin, fragile strand of hope. He said nothing. He only turned and walked out of the kitchen, not agreeing, but not forbidding her either. Elise watched his back disappear. Then she picked up the plate. The sandwich sat neatly on white porcelain, simple, ordinary, the thing none of the previous medical teams had thought to try. It might save a child, or it might become the 21st failure. Elise didn't know. She only knew this was the only chance she had. She climbed the stairs, each step heavy. In her mind, the quiet prayer from last night repeated itself. Please don't let me fail. Elise pushed open Penny's bedroom door, her heart pounding hard in her chest. The little girl was still sitting in the corner as always, her back against the bed frame, her eyes fixed on the photograph of her mother hanging on the wall. The television still played the same familiar cartoon. Everything looked just as it had 2 days before. But today, Elise brought something different. Not oatmeal porridge or fried eggs, but a plate of grilled cheese cut into small, triangular pieces. She set the plate on the floor, in the middle of that familiar distance of 5 steps. Then she sat down on the chair and said nothing. No forcing, no pleading, just sitting there. But this time, Elise did something else. She picked up a piece of the sandwich, lifted it to her mouth, and took a bite. The warm, buttery smell spread through the air. Melted cheese stretched into glossy golden strings. Elise chewed slowly, as if she had all day, as if nothing in the world mattered more than this piece of bread. From the corner, Penny glanced over. For the first time, the child's eyes weren't on her mother's picture. They were on Elise, following every movement, the way she held the sandwich, the way she chewed, the way she swallowed. Elise pretended not to notice. She kept eating, her gaze drifting toward the window as if she were thinking about something far away. My grandmother used to say, Elise spoke softly, grilled cheese tastes better when you eat it with someone you trust. Silence. The television kept playing, but Elise knew Penny was listening. She kept chewing, unhurried. Then a small voice broke through, hoarse and trembling. My mom used to make that. Elise's throat tightened. She turned to look at Penny. The little girl had turned fully toward her now, big brown eyes shimmering with something. Not empty like before. There was feeling there. Memory. Pain. Then your mom had excellent taste, Elise said with a faint smile. Penny didn't smile back, but she kept talking. On Sundays, after church, she made it, and I stood on a tall chair to help her spread the butter. The child's voice caught. I miss my mom. I miss her so much. I know, sweetheart, Elise whispered. I know. Penny looked at the plate on the floor, her hand lifted, as if to reach for a piece, but then it pulled back, as if something stopped her, as if she was afraid of something. Miss Elise. Penny's voice was small as breath. Yes, honey. If I eat. She hesitated, her eyes shining with tears. Will I forget my mom? Elise stopped breathing. The question struck straight through her like a blade. She hadn't expected it. Hadn't expected a 5-year-old to carry a thought like that. She hadn't expected this to be the reason Penny refused to eat. Not because she wasn't hungry, not because she didn't want to live, but because she was afraid. Afraid that if she kept living, kept eating, kept growing, she would forget her mother, forget those Sundays in the kitchen, forget the scent of her mother's perfume, the sound of her mother's laughter, the warmth of her mother's arms. Tears rose in Elise's eyes and spilled over. She couldn't stop them. She stepped closer to Penny and knelt until she was level with the child's face. No, sweetheart. Her voice trembled, but it was steady. Eating this isn't forgetting your mom. Eating this is remembering her. Penny stared at her, doubt filling her gaze. Every bite you take, Elise continued, is a memory of Sundays with your mom, the smell of butter in the kitchen, the laughter between you, the love she gave you. Elise gently touched Penny's cheek and wiped away a tear sliding down. Your mom wanted you to eat. Your mom wanted you to live. Your mom wanted you to remember the happy moments, not drown in pain. Promise, Penny whispered. Promise I won't forget her. I promise, sweetheart. You will never forget your mom. Penny's hand lifted again. This time it didn't stop. Those tiny, thin fingers, trembling, touched a piece of the sandwich, picked it up, brought it to her mouth. Elise held her breath. The whole world seemed to stop turning. Penny bit down, a small bite. She chewed slowly. Her eyes squeezed shut. Tears began to roll down her cheeks. She swallowed, the first bite after 14 days, and then Penny broke open. A sob tore out from deep inside her chest, as if it had been trapped there for months and finally broke free. It wasn't a child's small, whimpering cry. It was something deeper, shattered, a pain that went all the way to the bone. Elise gathered the little girl into her arms and let Penny cry into her shoulder. I miss my mom, Penny sobbed. I miss her so much. I want to see her. I know, sweetheart, Elise whispered, her own tears soaking her face. I know. Cry. It's okay. Cry. Penny cried. Cried until there were no tears left. Cried for all the silent days. Cried for the longing she couldn't put into words. Cried for the loneliness of a 5-year-old child, facing death in a way no one around her understood. Elise held her and didn't speak, only let her cry. And in the doorway, a man stood frozen. Tristan Blackwell, the most notorious Mafia boss in Chicago, the man the entire underworld feared. He stood there with a hand over his mouth, his whole body trembling. Tears streamed down a face that had never cried in front of anyone. His daughter was eating, for the first time in 14 days. His daughter was crying, for the first time since her mother's funeral. And he, the most powerful Mafia boss in the city, was crying with her. Tristan didn't know how long he'd been standing in the doorway. Maybe a few minutes. Maybe a whole lifetime. He stood there with a hand over his mouth, his entire body trembling in a way he couldn't control. Tears ran down the face of a man who had never cried in front of anyone. The most notorious Mafia boss in Chicago. The man who could order a killing without blinking. The man who made the entire underworld tremble. He was crying like a child because his daughter was eating, for the first time in 14 days, a simple grilled cheese sandwich that a dozen high-level psychologists couldn't get her to touch. But more than that, she was crying, for the first time since her mother's funeral. For 6 months, Penny had been silent as a statue. No talking, no smiling, no crying. He had thought that silence was the worst thing, thought that if it went on, he would go insane. But now he understood. Silence was Penny underwater, drowning in pain no one could see. And this crying, this shattered, aching crying, was his child breaking the surface, trying to breathe, trying to live. Tristan stepped into the room. His legs felt like stone. Every step was impossibly heavy. He walked past Elise, the woman holding his daughter in her arms. He dropped to his knees beside them, his knees meeting the icy floor. Penny lifted her head and looked at him through tears. Dad. Her voice was rough and weak, but it was the sweetest sound Tristan had ever heard. He pulled her into his arms and held her tight, so tight he was afraid that if he let go she would disappear, the way Caroline had disappeared. I'm here, sweetheart, he whispered into her hair, his voice breaking. I'm here. I'm sorry. I'm sorry I haven't been here all this time. Penny still held a piece of sandwich in her hand. She looked up at him with big brown eyes flooded with tears. I'm eating, Dad, she said, her voice trembling, like Mom wanted. Tristan couldn't speak. His throat felt crushed. He only nodded, tears falling into the dull brown hair of his little girl. Penny lifted the sandwich to her mouth and took another bite, chewed slowly, swallowed, then took another bite. She ate 2 full triangular pieces, her first meal in 14 days. Every bite was a small victory. Every swallow was a step out of the dark. Tristan held her, watched her eat, and wept. He cried from relief, from joy, from guilt, from everything he'd forced down for 6 months. Elise rose quietly and stepped back, giving father and daughter space. Tears still ran down her cheeks, but her mouth softened into a small smile. She'd done it. Not with complicated psychological theory, not with modern medical machines, but with a plate of grilled cheese and understanding. She whispered, light as breath, "Thank you, God." Out in the hallway, Mrs. Ruth leaned against the wall with both hands over her mouth, crying without sound. She had witnessed the impossible. Caroline's child, the baby she had cared for from the moment she was born, was eating, crying, coming back to life. She had thought she would lose the little girl the way she had lost Caroline. But no, Penny was returning, little by little. Penny had eaten, Penny had cried, Penny had called for her father. But the story didn't end here. Tonight, when Tristan sat beside his daughter's bed and refused to leave, not even for a second, the child would say something. A truth she had hidden for 2 weeks, a truth about why she wouldn't eat. And it would break Tristan in a way no bullet ever could. That night, Penny was exhausted. She lay on the bed, brown hair fanned across the white pillow, her eyes heavy from crying too much. Her small hand still gripped Elise's shirt, as if she were afraid that if she let go, that woman would disappear. Elise sat on the edge of the bed, one hand gently stroking the child's hair. Tristan sat on the other side, not taking his eyes off his daughter for even a second. He had been sitting there for hours, watching her breathe, watching her blink, watching every smallest movement, as if he feared that if he looked away, she would vanish the way Caroline had vanished. The room sank into darkness, lit only by the pale yellow glow of a night lamp that cast soft shadows on the wall. The television was off. For the first time in 2 weeks, the room was completely silent. Penny wasn't asleep. Her eyes were heavy, but they stayed open, fixed on the ceiling as if she were thinking about something very far away. Elise thought she was about to drift off. But then, a tiny voice rose in the darkness. "Miss Elise." "Yes, honey." Elise leaned closer, her voice gentle. Penny was quiet for a moment. Then she asked, with the innocent tone of a child asking about the weather or a lesson at school, "Miss Elise, why do the people in white coats keep trying to make me strong? I just want to be tired, so I can go find Mommy." The air in the room turned to ice. Elise felt her heart miss a beat. Tristan went rigid in his chair, his eyes widening as he stared at his daughter. "Penny, what are you saying?" His voice came out raw, as if someone were squeezing his throat shut. Penny turned her head to look at her father. Her big brown eyes were clear, innocent, without any fear or hesitation, as if what she was about to say was the most obvious thing in the world. "I want to go see Mom, Dad." Tristan couldn't breathe. It felt like something slammed into his chest. He tried to speak, but no words would come. Penny continued, her voice still soft, still calm in a way that was terrifying. "Mrs. Ruth said Mom went to heaven, so I thought, if I don't eat, I can go after her." A strangled sound broke from deep in Tristan's throat. Not a sob, not a scream, the sound of a man being torn apart from the inside. But Penny didn't stop. She kept talking, as if she were explaining something simple. "I tried really hard, Dad. My tummy hurt. My head hurt. I was so tired. Sometimes I wanted to eat so much. But I kept thinking, just wait a little longer, and I'll see Mom. Mom will hold me. Mom will sing to me. Like before." Elise couldn't breathe. She sat there, still holding Penny's hand, but her whole body had gone numb. A 5-year-old child, 5 years old, had tried to end her own life in the only way she knew. By not eating, to starve, to follow her mother to heaven. And no one had seen it. No one had understood. Those with decades of academic study and clinical practice had looked right at her. Yet none of them had recognized this simple, brutal truth. They thought Penny was depressed, traumatized, disordered in her eating. They used complicated medical terms to explain it. But the truth was far simpler and far more painful. Penny only wanted to see her mother, and she believed the only way to do that was to die. Tristan surged up from his chair and dropped to his knees beside the bed, grabbing his daughter's hand. His hand shook. His whole body shook. "Penny, why didn't you tell me?" His voice broke as tears poured down. "Why did you carry this alone? Why didn't you tell me?" Penny blinked at him, her expression innocent, as if his question was strange, as if the answer was so obvious it didn't need to be said. She opened her mouth, and the words that came next would shatter Tristan completely. Shatter him in a way no bullet, no enemy, no pain from the past had ever managed to do. Penny had wanted to die. A 5-year-old child had wanted to die to see her mother. But what would hurt Tristan even more wasn't that truth. It was why Penny hadn't told him, why she had kept that secret alone for 2 weeks. And the answer was about to be revealed. Penny fell back asleep from sheer exhaustion. Her small body lay still on the bed, her breathing steady and soft. But even in sleep, she refused to let go. One hand clutched Elise's shirt. One hand held Tristan's hand, as if she feared that if she released them, both of them would disappear, the way her mother had disappeared. Elise and Tristan sat on either side of the bed, neither of them speaking. The room was sunk in darkness, lit only by the pale yellow night lamp and the even sound of Penny's breathing. Both of them were worn down by what had just happened. The confessions, the tears, the old wounds ripped open again, but neither of them wanted to leave. Around 2 o'clock in the morning, Penny shifted. She opened her eyes and looked at Elise with a drowsy gaze still wet with tears. "Miss Elise." Her voice was tiny in the dark. "Yes, sweetheart?" Elise leaned down and softly smoothed the child's hair. "Did your mom go to heaven too?" Elise gave a sad little smile. "Yes, honey. My mom went to heaven too." Penny was quiet for a moment, as if thinking. Then she asked, her voice innocent, "Did you want to go after your mom?" The question went straight into Elise's chest. She didn't answer at first. A long moment passed. Then she said, with an honesty that hurt, "Sometimes I did." Tristan lifted his head and looked at Elise. His eyes held questions he didn't speak. Elise didn't look at him. She only looked at Penny and gently stroked her cheek. 18 months ago, I lost someone too," she said slowly. Penny blinked. "Who?" "My son." Elise's voice caught. "He didn't get to be born. He was in my belly, 7 months already, but he couldn't stay." Tears began to slide down Elise's cheeks. She hadn't told anyone this for 18 months. Not friends, not former co-workers, not a single person. But tonight, in this dark room, with a 5-year-old holding her hand, she said it out loud. "I wanted to meet him so badly," Elise whispered. "I bought a crib, clothes, toys. I named him. I dreamed about a future with him, and then he was gone." Penny watched Elise, big eyes shining in the dark. "Did your baby go to heaven too?" "Yes." Silence. Then Penny said, her voice innocent but carrying that strange childlike wisdom, "Then your baby and my mom can be friends up there." Elise stopped breathing. "My mom will take care of your baby," Penny went on, as if stating the most obvious thing in the world. "Like Mom took care of me. My mom really liked taking care of babies. She told me she wanted to have another baby for me. So she'll take care of your baby really well," Elise cried, silently, tears flowing and flowing down her cheeks. She pulled Penny into her arms and held her tight. "Yes, sweetheart," she whispered. "I think they're friends. Your mom and my baby. They're playing together in heaven, and they're looking down on us." Tristan sat still and watched it all. He looked at the woman from the south side, holding his daughter, a woman who had lost her mother at 10, lost her baby 18 months ago, lost everything, and yet she had come here anyway, still trying to save someone else's child. How strong was she? He didn't know. He only knew that without her, Penny wouldn't be here anymore. She had done what 20 specialists, and even he, the child's father, couldn't do. Penny fell asleep again, this time deeper, calmer. Her hand still held Elise's shirt and Tristan's hand. The room sank into silence. Tristan looked at Elise through the darkness. "You lost a baby," he said, not a question. 18 months ago, 7th month. "A boy," Elise answered, her voice low. "I'm sorry," Tristan said. "Pain recognizes pain." Elise gave a sad smile. "That's all." I look at Penny and I see myself, at 10 years old, 18 months ago. I know what that darkness looks like. I know how it swallows people whole. Silence stretched. "Thank you," Tristan said, his voice rough, "for not giving up, for saving my daughter." Elise looked at Penny sleeping, her face peaceful. She deserves to live. I only reminded her of that. That night, the 3 of them sat in the dark. The most powerful Mafia boss in Chicago, a former nurse who had lost her baby, and a 5-year-old who had almost ended her own life. 3 broken lives, meeting by chance in this cold house. And for the first time in a very long time, none of them felt alone. But this was only the beginning. The road to healing was still long ahead. 3 weeks passed, and in those 3 weeks, the Blackwell mansion began to change. Penny started eating at every meal. Slowly, one small bite at a time, but steadily. Porridge in the morning, soup at lunch, rice at dinner. No more untouched trays dumped into the trash. No more meals refused and abandoned. Color returned to her cheeks, a warm blush replacing the pale, bloodless skin. Her shoulder bones no longer jutted out in that frightening way beneath her clothes. And most importantly, laughter came back. The clear, bright laughter of a 5-year-old rang through a house that had been drowned in silence for 6 months. That sound was like sunlight breaking through heavy clouds, warming every cold corner of the rooms. Tristan changed too. He came home at 5 in the evening instead of midnight. He ate dinner with Penny and Elise every day, sitting at the table like a real family. He read stories to his daughter every night, keeping the promise he had sworn in that dark hour. Each evening, he sat beside Penny's bed, a book of fairy tales in his hands, and read in a low, steady voice until his little girl drifted to sleep. Sometimes Penny asked to hear the same story again. Sometimes she asked innocent questions, and Tristan answered them all, patient and gentle, as if he were trying to make up for the 6 months he had been absent. On the first Sunday after 3 weeks, Elise decided to bring back the old tradition. She led Penny into the kitchen and helped her stand on the tall stool Caroline used to use. Penny looked at the ingredients on the counter: white bread, butter, cheese, her eyes shining. "Like Mom used to make," she whispered. "Yes, sweetheart," Elise smiled. "Like Mom used to make." She showed Penny how to spread butter on the bread. The child's tiny hands were clumsy, butter smearing everywhere, but Penny laughed, a bright, ringing sound filling the kitchen. And then Tristan walked in. He paused by the stove, watching the two of them with an odd expression. "Can I help?" he asked, his voice hesitant. Elise handed him the spatula. "Flip the sandwich." Tristan took it, awkward as a child learning to cook for the first time. He flipped the first piece and burned one side black. Penny burst into laughter. "Dad, you burned it." Tristan looked at the scorched bread, then at his daughter laughing, and he laughed too. For the first time in 6 months, the notorious Chicago Mafia boss truly laughed. Mrs. Ruth stood in the kitchen doorway, quietly wiping away tears. She had waited far too long for this moment. One afternoon, Elise was walking down the hallway when she ran into Finn. The bodyguard stopped and looked at her for a long moment. "I was wrong about you," he said, his voice low. Elise paused, surprised. "When you first came, I thought you were here for money, or for something bad. I warned you. I watched you. I waited for you to make a mistake." Finn took a slow breath. "But all I've seen is you loving that child like she's your own. You're a good person, and my boss needs good people around him." Elise gave a small smile. "Thank you." Finn nodded and walked away. He didn't add anything else, because nothing else was needed. But healing isn't a straight line. There were nights Penny still had nightmares. One night, a scream tore through her room. "Mom. Mom. Don't go. Mommy." Elise sprang up and ran in. Penny was sitting upright in bed, eyes wide, her whole body shaking, tears streaming down her face. She was still dreaming, still seeing her mother falling at the school gate, still hearing the gunshot. Elise pulled her into her arms and rocked her gently. "I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. I'm here with you." Tristan stood in the doorway, helpless. He wanted to do something, but he didn't know what. He could only stand there, watching the woman from the south side soothe his daughter, and understand something he'd never been able to accept before. Healing takes time. There are good days. There are bad nights. But what matters is not giving up. Penny slowly calmed and fell back asleep in Elise's arms, and Tristan knew they would get through it. Day by day, Penny made a little more progress. She began to play again. The dust-covered dollhouse was opened. Stuffed animals were hugged close. Coloring books were flipped through. She began asking the innocent questions of any 5-year-old. Why is the sky blue? Why can birds fly? Why does ice cream melt when it's hot? And Elise answered them all, patient and gentle. Penny laughed more and more, the clearest laughter Tristan had ever heard. Every time he heard his daughter laugh, his heart felt a little lighter. Penny was coming back, day by day, meal by meal, smile by smile. But it wasn't only the child who was changing, Tristan was too. And in his heart, something was slowly beginning to grow, something he never expected to feel again after losing Caroline. The following weeks went by, and Tristan began to realize something was changing inside him. Not only his relationship with Penny, but also the way he looked at Elise. One night, after Penny had fallen asleep, he went downstairs and found Elise sitting alone out on the balcony. She sat in a wicker chair, gazing toward Lake Michigan, where the moonlight glittered on the water. The night breeze moved softly through her hair. He didn't know why, but he went into the kitchen, made a cup of hot tea, and carried it out to sit beside her. He didn't say anything. He just sat there, present. Elise turned to look at him, gave a small smile, then turned back to the lake. They sat that way for an hour. No one spoke a word, yet the silence didn't feel heavy. It felt peaceful, warm, as if simply being near each other was enough. Then there were other evenings. Penny lay between them on the large sofa in the living room, watching cartoons. Her head rested on Elise's shoulder, her legs draped across Tristan's lap. She giggled at the funny scenes on the screen. Elise stroked the child's hair, and Tristan watched the two of them. In that moment, they looked like a real family, not a boss and a housemaid, but a father, a mother, and a daughter. Tristan felt an unfamiliar warmth spread through his chest. One early morning, he walked past Elise's room and saw the door slightly open. She was kneeling beside her bed, hands folded, eyes closed. She was praying. Tristan wasn't religious. He didn't believe in God or heaven, but watching Elise pray, seeing the calm on her face, moved him. She believed in something larger than herself, and maybe it was that belief that had given her the strength to survive everything. Penny's 6th birthday fell on a warm Sunday. Elise arranged a small party in the garden, only the people closest to them. Mrs. Ruth, Finn, a few guards who had worked for the family for many years. Elise baked the birthday cake herself. It wasn't perfect. The frosting wasn't smooth. The letters were a little crooked. But when Penny saw it, she squealed with delight. "It's so pretty." She blew out the candles, the flames reflected in her shining brown eyes. Tristan sat beside her and asked softly, "What did you wish for?" Penny was quiet for a moment. Then she turned to look at Elise, her gaze clear and bright. "I wish Miss Elise would stay forever." Elise swallowed hard. She didn't know what to say. Tears rose in her eyes. Tristan looked at her, and his eyes held something deeper, something he had been trying to deny for weeks. After the party, Penny pulled Elise by the hand into the bedroom. "I have a present for you." She took out a rolled-up sheet of paper. Elise unrolled it. It was a drawing in colored pencils. 4 people holding hands. Tristan, tall and broad, in a black suit. Elise in a blue dress. Penny, tiny, in the middle, and Mrs. Ruth with silver hair. Above them, in white clouds, were 2 more figures. A brown-haired woman in a white dress, and a tiny baby wrapped in a blanket. "That's my mom and Miss Elise's baby," Penny explained in her innocent voice. "They're friends in heaven. My mom takes care of your baby so you can take care of me." Elise couldn't hold back anymore. She pulled Penny into her arms and cried without sound. How could a 6-year-old understand so much? How could she say something so beautiful? Penny hugged her back and patted her as if comforting her. "Don't cry, Miss Elise. My mom is really good at taking care of babies. Don't worry." From that day on, Tristan couldn't deny it anymore. He found himself looking forward to coming home every day, not only because of Penny, but because of Elise, because of her laughter in the kitchen, because of the way she looked at him when he walked through the door, because of the peace he felt when she was near. He realized he was falling in love, for the first time since Caroline died, and it frightened him. The last time he loved a woman, she died. A bullet meant for him had taken Caroline's life right in front of their daughter. He was a Mafia boss, and he had more enemies than he could count. If he loved Elise, he would be bringing her into danger. She could become the next target. She could die because of him, the way Caroline died. Tristan knew he was in love, but he also knew his world, an underworld full of blood and guns. Loving Elise might be the most beautiful thing he ever did, or the most dangerous. That night, after Penny had fallen into a deep sleep, Tristan went downstairs. He didn't know what he was looking for until he heard a soft melody drifting from the kitchen, Elise's voice. She was washing dishes, cleaning up, and humming under her breath a lullaby that was probably something her mother used to sing to her. Tristan stood in the kitchen doorway, watching her. Warm yellow light fell across her hair, across the slight curve of her shoulders as she leaned over the sink. She was beautiful. Not the dazzling kind of beauty Caroline had, but something quieter and warmer, like early morning sunlight. He didn't know how long he stood there. until Elise turned and startled when she saw him. "Elise," he said, his voice low. She looked at him, a little surprised. "Mr. Tristan? Is something wrong?" He stepped into the kitchen, closer to her. His heart was beating fast. The most notorious Mafia boss in Chicago, the man who never shook when he faced an enemy, was shaking now, standing in front of a woman. "I need to tell you something," he said, his voice rough. Elise set the dish towel down and waited. Tristan drew a deep breath. He had been thinking about this moment for weeks, telling himself he mustn't say it, forcing it down. But he couldn't anymore. "These past months, with you here, I feel like I've come back to life," he began, each word coming out slowly. "After Caroline died, I thought I died with her. I only existed. I went to work. I came home. I watched my daughter wither, and I couldn't do anything. I wasn't living anymore." He took another step. "Then you came. You saved Penny. You brought laughter back into this house. You brought light into the dark." His voice broke. "You saved my daughter. And you saved me too." Elise stood still, her eyes shining in the lamplight. "I'm in love with you, Elise," Tristan said, the words almost a breath. "I'm not asking for anything. I'm not demanding anything. I just need you to know, I love you too." Elise cut him off. Tristan went still. He couldn't believe what he'd heard. Elise stepped closer and placed her hand over his chest, where his heart was pounding wildly. "How could I not?" she said, her voice trembling. "I watched you break and stitch yourself back together. I watched you become the father Penny needed. I watched you cry for her, change for her, learn how to love again for her. That's the man I love. Not the Mafia boss, the man who would do anything for his daughter." Tristan looked at her, his throat tight. Then he bent down and pressed his mouth to hers. Gentle, careful, as if he feared she would disappear if he rushed. His first kiss in 6 months, since the last time he kissed Caroline. Elise kissed him back, her arms sliding around his neck. And in that moment, the whole world stopped turning. But happiness didn't last. 2 weeks later, Finn knocked on Tristan's office door, his face tight with strain. "Boss, we've got a problem," he said, his voice low. "Someone knows about her. About Elise." Tristan went rigid. "Who?" "The Rossetti gang. They're trying to pressure you, and they think she's your weak point." Tristan's heart clenched. Not again. Enemies from the underworld, again. The person he loved pulled into danger, again. From that day on, Tristan grew distant. He avoided Elise. No more evenings together on the balcony. No more easy smiles. He came home later, left earlier, avoided meeting her eyes. A week later, Elise stopped him in the hallway. "You're avoiding me," she said plainly, her eyes locked on his. "What happened?" Tristan didn't answer. "Tristan," she said, speaking his name for the first time without any formal address. "Tell me." He let out a tired breath. "Caroline died because of a bullet meant for me," he said, his voice full of pain. "She died because she was my wife, because she loved me. I can't let that happen to you, Elise. I can't watch another woman I love die because of me." He looked at her, eyes reddened. "So I think it's better if you leave, before it's too late." Elise was silent for a long time. Then she stepped closer until she was right in front of him. "I lost my mother when I was 10, she said, her voice firm. "I lost my baby 18 months ago. I've lived through things I shouldn't have survived. You think I'm afraid of some gangsters?" She took his hand. "I'm not going anywhere, Tristan. Penny needs me. You need me. And I need both of you. This is my family now, the only family I have." Her eyes shone. "If there's danger, we face it together. That's what family is. You don't get to send me away to protect me. You only get to stay beside me and fight with me." Tristan stared at her. The small woman from the south side standing there was braver than anyone he'd ever met. He pulled her into his arms and held her tight. "I'll protect you," he whispered into her hair. "No matter what it costs. I swear." A month later, the threat disappeared. The Rossetti gang was no longer a problem. No one asked what had happened. No one needed to know. In Tristan's world, there were questions that didn't need answers. What mattered was that they were safe. Elise was safe. Penny was safe. And Tristan was ready for the next step. 1 month after the threat disappeared, the Blackwell mansion was filled with laughter. Every Sunday, the three of them went into the kitchen to make grilled cheese together. Penny stood on the tall stool, spreading butter on the bread with hands that had grown more skillful than before. Tristan flipped the sandwiches at the stove, no longer clumsy the way he had been the first time, and Elise stood between them, watching father and daughter laugh and tease each other, her heart warming in a way she couldn't explain. Penny was healthier than ever. Her cheeks were rosy. Her eyes sparkled. She talked more, asked more questions, laughed more, as if the darkness of a year ago had never existed. One night, after Penny had fallen asleep, Tristan took Elise's hand and led her out to the balcony. The lights of Chicago glittered below like a carpet of fallen stars. Lake Michigan reflected the silver moon, rippling gently. A night breeze moved softly, carrying the crisp chill of autumn. Tristan stood beside Elise, looking out at the familiar view. "A year ago," he began, his voice low, "I thought my life was over, losing Caroline, watching Penny die a little more every day. I had no reason left to live. I woke up every morning and asked myself why I still had to breathe." He turned to her. "Then you walked in, with those yellow baby socks in your coat pocket, with your own pain, with a heart that was broken and still somehow big enough to love my daughter." He took her hand and held it tight. "You saved Penny. You saved me. You brought light into a house that had only darkness left." Then Tristan dropped to one knee. He pulled a small velvet box from his pocket and opened it. Inside was a diamond ring that flashed beneath the moonlight. Elise covered her mouth, tears spilling over. "Elise Monroe," Tristan said, his voice trembling slightly. "Will you be my wife?" Elise cried. She nodded, nodding again and again. "Yes. 1,000,000 times yes." The next morning, Penny ran into the dining room and saw the ring on Elise's hand. Her eyes went wide. "You two are getting married?" she asked, her voice full of amazement. Tristan knelt down to her level. "I want to ask your opinion first. Do you agree?" Penny thought for a moment, her face serious as if weighing something very important. Then she asked, "Do we still eat grilled cheese on Sundays?" "Forever," Tristan promised. Penny smiled, the brightest smile she had ever worn. "Then I agree." 3 months later, the wedding took place in the mansion garden, a small ceremony by Lake Michigan under a golden sunset. No spectacle, no headlines, only the people closest to them. Mrs. Ruth wore the nicest dress she owned, tears running down her face through the entire ceremony. Finn stood solemnly beside Tristan, the bodyguard's eyes shining with real joy for the first time. And Penny was the flower girl, wearing a wide white dress, carrying a basket of roses and scattering petals along the aisle. She smiled the entire ceremony. Elise walked to Tristan in a simple white gown that was breathtaking all the same. They exchanged vows, not fancy words, only simple promises, honest and true, to stay together through everything until the end of their lives. After the ceremony, when the guests had left, Penny tugged Elise to a quiet corner. The little girl looked up at her, big brown eyes shimmering. "Miss Elise." "No, now you're Dad's wife." She hesitated. "My mom is in heaven. I know. I'll never forget my mom." She took Elise's hand. "But you're here with me. You take care of me. You love me." Her lips trembled. "Can I call you Mama Elise?" Elise knelt down and pulled Penny into her arms, crying without sound. "Yes, sweetheart," she whispered. "Perfect. So perfect." On the night after the wedding, the three of them lay on the big sofa in the living room. Penny lay in the middle, her head on Elise's shoulder, her legs across Tristan's lap. The television was playing a cartoon, but no one was watching. "Dad, tell the story about how Mama Elise came to our house," Penny said, drowsy. Tristan smiled and began to tell it. The story of a bitter winter morning, of a woman from the South Side walking into the mansion with yellow baby socks in her coat pocket, of a simple grilled cheese sandwich that made a miracle. Penny listened with her eyes closed, a smile on her lips. "Dad," she whispered when the story ended, "I'm glad I stayed." Tristan's throat tightened. He bent down and kissed her forehead. "I'm glad too, sweetheart. So glad." A little later, when Tristan thought Penny was asleep, she opened her eyes again. "Dad, Mama Elise?" "Yes, baby? I think Mom sent Mama Elise to us," she said, her voice innocent but carrying that strange, childlike wisdom. "Mom is in heaven, but she still worries about me. She knew I needed someone to love me the way she loved me, so she found Mama Elise and sent her." Penny looked at Elise. "And I think Mom sent Mama Elise's baby to be Mom's friend, so Mom won't be lonely in heaven." Tristan and Elise looked at each other, tears rolling down their cheeks. "Do you think I'm right?" Penny asked, her eyes clear. You are, sweetheart, Tristan whispered, his voice thick. You're so right. The night grew late. Penny fell asleep between them. Tristan looked out the window, where the city lights of Chicago glittered like fallen stars. A house that had once been cold as a tomb was now warm, filled with the steady breathing of his daughter and the warmth of his new wife beside him. He lifted his gaze to Caroline's photograph hanging on the wall. In the picture, she was smiling, the bright smile he had loved so much. Thank you, he whispered into the darkness, for sending her, for not leaving me and our daughter alone, for everything. And for the first time after a year of suffering, Tristan Blackwell felt something he had believed was gone forever. Peace. The Mafia boss's daughter didn't eat for 2 weeks, but that wasn't the story. The story was what happened after, when a woman who had lost her mother at 10, lost her son 18 months ago, lost everything she loved, stepped into a broken house, and reminded everyone inside that they deserve to live. Love doesn't give up. Miracles don't come from money or power. They come from strangers becoming family, from a Sunday grilled cheese sandwich, from a child learning how to live again, and from a father finally finding his way home. This story teaches us that sometimes what heals the deepest wound isn't money, power, or complicated therapy, but simply presence, understanding, and real love. Elise didn't have degrees or professional experience, but she had something more precious. She understood Penny's pain because she had lived it herself. Pain recognizes pain, and sometimes that's all we need to begin healing. If you're going through a hard season in life, remember that you deserve to live. You deserve to be loved. You deserve to be happy. And if you know someone drowning in darkness, don't give up on them. Sometimes just sitting beside them, saying nothing, simply being there, can be enough to save a life. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to our channel, hit like, and share this video so more people can hear meaningful stories every day. We'd love to know how you felt after hearing this story. Have you ever witnessed someone make it through pain that seemed impossible? Have you ever been the person who helped someone find the light again? Or are you the one who needs someone to sit beside you right now? Share your feelings in the comments below. We read every comment, and we truly value every story you trust us with, because sometimes sharing your pain is the first step toward healing. Thank you for staying with us through this long story. We wish everyone watching this video good health, a joyful life, peace, and happiness every day. Remember, no matter how hard life gets, there is always someone willing to love you and not give up on you. Goodbye, and we'll see you in the next video.